sex toys, most of them are designed to help women achieve orgasm. And the idea that you could openly sell things that help women achieve orgasm is pretty new.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're talking with Phil Harvey. He's an entrepreneur, he's a philanthropist, and he's also the author of the new novel Showtime. Phil, thanks for talking to us.
My pleasure.
You are also a sometime donor to Reason Foundation, the nonprofit that publishes Reason.com and Reason TV, so thank you for that.
We've got that out of the way.
Yes, we do. Now, Showtime, your novel, is a take on reality TV. It has 7 people who have to live on an island in the middle of Lake Superior as winter approaches. The winners emerge and get $400,000. It's a dark, interesting, darkly comic take on reality TV, as well as both a world in which people have to do things or feel they have to do things for money, as well as the greed and power trips of well-placed individuals. What brought you to write this book?
Well, I've always been interested in violence as entertainment, something that we have a great deal of in American and most other cultures. I think we have a bit more of an addiction to it in the United States than many other countries. And the idea that violence as entertainment might go beyond a chance of death, as in NASCAR racing or professional football, which has gotten quite dangerous now, to a point where the producers of a reality show would actually hope for a fatality, and where the audience would be kind of sitting on the edge of their seats hoping for something perhaps close to a death. It seemed to me to be an intriguing proposition, an interesting hypothesis.
Are you a critic of violence and sexuality in popular culture? Do you see that as desensitizing or dehumanizing people?
No, I'm certainly not a critic of violence or sexuality in literature or entertainment. And I'm not either a critic or a fan of reality shows, except that they're all obviously rehearsed and therefore hypocritical. And I don't particularly enjoy watching them, and therefore writing something that is a dark parody of reality TV was a pleasure for me to take on. But we need violence and sexuality in our entertainment, I think. Human beings are descended from people who had to deal with violence to survive, and simulated or possible violence, or even, as I point out in the book from time to time, little wars, of which I'm afraid we've had too many now in the United States, are satisfying to people, and therefore in democracies to their political leaders. Violence worldwide is going down, right, which is something of a surprise to a lot of people, but the chances of anyone dying violently at the hands of another human being are less today than they ever have been in the history of humankind. So we're becoming a less violent species. But we need it, yeah, for sublimation.
And also sex as well, right? Or representations of sex. Also, I mean, you're the founder and president of the Adam and Eve catalog, leading adult products. Do you see now, say, starting from the 80s to now, are we in a better age where people understand that fantasy violence and fantasy sexuality provides a positive social role, or can, or are we actually moving backwards towards more repression of expression?
I would say in general, we're not moving backward to more repression of speech, except at Harvard, mm-hmm, where, and other private universities, where speech codes have become absolutely ridiculous. And if you happen to be a student at one of those universities or colleges, your speech is more curtailed than it is anywhere else, I think, in the United States today. But generally, we're certainly not going back to the days when Lady Chatterley's lover could be declared illegal. We're not going back to the days where Ulysses could be banned in general.
But how much of that is changing social mores, and how much of that is technological change that just allows people to rat around various forms of censorship?
it's change in sexual mores. I think that American society clearly is much more open and receptive to the idea of good sex. The discussion of sex in most cultures for centuries past has all been about bad sex, what you shouldn't do, what you can't do. Sex toys, most of them are designed to help women achieve orgasm, and the idea that you could openly sell things that help women achieve orgasm is pretty new.
Yep.
But it is now widely accepted, and I think that the revolution in women's views about their own sexuality and their right, if you will, to enjoy a full sexual life is relatively new, and I think all of that is very positive.
What was the trigger on that? You know, and I hate to say what pulled the trigger on the female orgasm, but I mean, you know, female sexuality has always been, you know, feared by male society and patriarchy and whatnot as a destabilizing factor. It's true that the West, broadly speaking, embraced female sexuality as a fact of life and not a bad thing, sometime in the past 30, 40, maybe 50 years. What changed that?
I don't know. I mean, it may simply be the emergence of anatomy. I mean, men have tried for millennia, not only centuries, to suppress female sexuality. The early Christians were absolute bears about it, calling intercourse disgusting and filthy. And of course, in many conservative Muslim societies today, the men are so afraid of sex that they cover women from head to toe lest they be reminded. Sex is a very powerful part of human existence, otherwise we wouldn't be here. While you're fighting off the lions and the saber-toothed tigers, you've got to have a pretty strong sex drive to procreate, and our ancestors did, and we're left with a very powerful sexuality which a great many people are afraid of. They're afraid of their own sexuality. But sooner or later, and as society has become more tolerant of different kinds of people and different attitudes, and that's a worldwide trend, it has also made it possible for women to say, and for men to say about women, that they're entitled to sexual pleasure and fulfillment just as men are.
You know, one of the things that's interesting about your work and your kind of portfolio of your work is, so you've got the novel, that's just out. You've written other books in the past that talk about, for instance, The Government versus Erotica, which was about your battles against the federal and state government prosecutions related to the Adam and Eve catalog. DKT International, another major business that you do, you provide low-cost voluntary family planning to developing nations. In this, you are also routing around government censorship and government repression in many ways. Can you talk a little bit about your efforts there and how that fits in with your other interests?
Well, promoting birth control, family planning in developing countries has been a career interest of mine, either because of great good luck or because both my organization, DKT, and a number of others have been fairly effective in delivering the goods. We've seen great success worldwide.
And what does that mean? What does great success mean?
Great success means that from a relatively small fraction of sexually active couples using birth control in mid-century or even in 1970, today, 60% of all cohabiting couples in the world are using some form of modern birth control. A huge, huge difference. And birth rates have fallen accordingly. The number of children born by the average woman in the world has fallen from an average of 5 just 20 or 30 years ago to 2 and a fraction today.
And what's important about that too is
success.
that represents a choice. I mean, we're not talking, you are very much in opposition to something like the Chinese one-child policy or anything like that. What you're talking about here is an exercise of choice that leads to a change in the birth rate.
Absolutely, and indeed, to me, whether it leads to a change in the birth rate or not isn't terribly important. I think it is probably a good thing that people are choosing to have fewer children today, because one of the reasons is that the children they do have are much more likely to live. The condition of families around the world and babies, while still much improvement is needed, are much better today than they were 20 or 30 years ago. But the main thing to me in making birth control easily, conveniently, and openly available around the world, which requires some pushing against censors, and part of what we do is to keep pushing the edge of the envelope on what's acceptable in television advertising, for example, in the Philippines or Vietnam or India, most of which tend to be more liberal in this respect than the United States. Does tend to contribute to a liberalizing trend vis-a-vis family planning. But the main thing is that people have that choice. They can decide how many children to have. It's a basic issue of freedom. And my impression is that once women have started making those choices and deciding when to get pregnant, when to bear children, there's no going back. You're not going to see birth rates shoot up again around the world, in my opinion. We're probably going to top out at about 9 billion people and then start to shrink.
Well, you know, in your professional life, or in your day job, I guess, day jobs, you're very goal oriented, and your products and your activity have a certain message. I know you've said that you don't particularly care for didactic fiction, that novels that have a point or an axe to grind tend to be uninteresting. But to bring it back to Showtime, what is a takeaway, and does it revolve around a kind of idea of self-control or empowerment, or what is the ultimate message that you want people to take away from reading Showtime?
Well, I don't particularly want them to take away a message. I want them to enjoy reading the book, to get into a different world and a different place, and have fun doing it. But that said, a message that I focused on when writing it is this idea of violence as entertainment, this idea that people increasingly, including the government, are going to be pulling the strings of entertainment in such a way as to provide vicarious violence to very large numbers of people, and that we will always have a few, and maybe more than a few, gladiator equivalents. And indeed, the people in the book are, in a sense, gladiator equivalents, risking their lives. The participants in Hunger Games are even more literally gladiators, because many of them have to die. Whereas in my book it isn't an absolute essential component, but of course that's part of the book. To me, the intellectually interesting part of this is the fact that we crave violence. If it bleeds, it leads. We all know that. You can't get attention by broadcasting good news, and the more violent the news is, the more likely it is to be watched and build ratings. There is something inherent in humans that finds violence interesting, compelling, and to some extent necessary. The logical end of that is going to be violence either in the form of little wars, in the form of television programs that include the possibility, at least, of real violence, as some of our entertainment already does, or other vicarious ways of meeting this need, which we're always going to have until we get to genetic manipulation of human beings, which is another subject for another time.
Yes, and what a dull world that will be.
Yes, it will.
Yes. Well, the book is Showtime. The author is Phil Harvey, who also is in charge of the Adam and Eve catalog and DKT International. Phil, thanks for talking to us.
My pleasure.
For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.